Wendy Capewell, an experienced counsellor and psychotherapist. I work with so many people who feel that they're the only ones struggling with the issues that they share with me. Possibly, like many of you, they feel so alone. And so the aim of this podcast is to talk to guests who have their own stories to share, their experience of the struggles that they've been through, or maybe they're continuing to live with, offering their insights as well as their inspiring journey. So let me introduce my guest. My guest today is Michelle Roberton, and we have similar things in common because I think we work with a similar client base and we have different experiences. I've had secondhand experience of childhood sexual abuse because I was in a relationship with somebody who had been sexually, physically and emotionally abused, and it had a profound effect on our relationship, and his view of the world. And I think, Michelle, you shared with me that you've had personal experience too. So maybe you want to share that in a minute. But before we go any further, I want to introduce you to Michelle Roberton. She's an intimacy and sexual trauma therapist. Hello, Michelle, and tell us all more about you.
Where to begin? But the most important thing to me is I'm a mum of 4 children. And that this work I share is been a growing of where I came from to where I am now. I like to call it discovering the medicine in the poison, because things that feel like we'll never be fixed from can actually, once we meet those wounds, they can actually support us to grow. So yes, my loves are my children, and I wouldn't call it work, but this service I share. Yeah.
So you have had personal experience of sexual abuse. I think we were talking just now about the difference of what is sexual abuse, what is trauma, because I think we could experience some kind of behavior as a child that isn't appropriate. It doesn't always in trauma. But then again, I think you were saying also, if I may, but I'm sure you're going to expand on this, that experience of abuse can rear its ugly head again, if you like, within traumas in experiences in our lives. Is that what I understood you to say?
Well, just from felt experience, because I don't know, as children we're feeling creatures. There's been different aspects in how my view of myself and how my felt sense of myself has changed. And the childhood sexual abuse was one thing that, as you said yourself, affected my relationships as I grew up, my relationship with my body, how I viewed the world around me, and how safe I felt in the world around me. But then on top of that, I've been very aware, working with others and myself, that there are sometimes times in our everyone's life where our sexuality is traumatized because of a situation. So menopause is a prime one, because there's something that is happening to our body or in our life that is affecting the way we view ourselves as a sexual being and the way we feel about ourselves. So childbirth, divorce. Last year I worked with a lot of people that were grieving, either because the relationship had ended or because their partner had died, and that had really affected how they felt as themselves as a sexual person. So I think anything that is stopping us from thriving as a sexual being is trauma, whereas abuse is something very different. It's when our body and our sex has been abused by another.
And I think it's, I'll go further in as much as being invaded rather than the abuse is some kind of invasion, isn't it?
It's violation.
Violation and invasive, yeah. Violation. Absolutely.
And
I think I'd agree with you. I remember that sense of my femininity or my feeling a woman when my husband and I broke up, you know, because I just felt that rejection and what was wrong with me and what's that sense of, well, am I not a woman anymore? Am I not desirable? So that it affects our whole being, doesn't it?
Yeah, it just, that then ripples out into how we feel about our body, how we feel about our life, how we show up in life, our creativity. So much is affected on how safe we feel as ourselves, sexual being, and how not like confident but self-assured we are in that. So I just, that's the different qualities of how I've noticed myself to be, and then how I've noticed these different aspects of life affecting different people that I'm sharing with. Yeah,
I think there's an awful lot. I think even going back early into adolescence, because the fact that our bodies change from the child to the into adulthood and experiencing periods and growing breasts and body hair and things like that. I think even that would be quite traumatic for that young person.
Yeah, I think they are traumatic events. It's also the way that the people around us respond to us and hold us in that. So that that's very relative. It could be traumatizing, but then I think trauma isn't necessarily, it's something that's happening on the outside and how we are responding to that on the inside, and the beliefs we create about ourselves from that experience. Like you were saying when you broke up with your husband, how you questioned yourself as a woman. And as you say, teenagers will question who they are as a sexual being if they're not getting the right support. I remember taking my daughter, as much as she disliked it at the time, through this whole thing when she started her menstruation, of all the women that we knew coming together. We had a glass of wine and we had a cake and she had presents, because I didn't want her to feel that it was something awful happening. It was something to celebrate. She was, grown into a woman.
Yeah.
So it definitely is the way that people react to us in situations.
Well, let's face it, in some countries there still is shame very much attached to women, as you said, and when they're menstruating, they're sent away, they're not allowed to touch food, they can't be part of the family. So I think that sense of shame is still around, it's still alive, kicking, sadly. So
And as you say, all these things inform us, even unconsciously, about who we are as a sexual being and what's appropriate and what we're worthy of as well, such as pleasure. If we're in so much shame, then how can we experience pleasure, and how will we allow ourselves pleasure?
So when you're talking about child sexual abuse, how do you feel that affects the women you work with? How does that affect their sense of their selves and their sexuality?
It affects a lot. Relationship with their body, affects the relationships they choose. I personally feel it's an uprooting, because the body is a painful place to live. And there's sometimes, things can't be remembered, and so as you start moving back into the body, memories, flashbacks start to happen. Strange things like smells can trigger us. So when I'm working with others and for myself, initially it was very much creating the body as a safe environment. That was really the key thing, because the body has become a painful place to live, and that's been known since childhood, that sensations are not safe, pleasure is not safe, to be quiet, and not always feeling beyond oneself, not in one's own skin. So yeah, it's about most people see sex as a problem, and focus on sex as a problem, which actually in any kind of abuse that can make us withdraw even further away, because it's reinforcing this idea of being a problem. Whereas if we create, I believe if we create environments, then these parts of us can naturally, organically begin to feel nourished, and therefore start thriving rather than minimally surviving.
Yeah, and I would agree. It creates so many concerns, and I know certainly with those clients that I've worked with that have experienced childhood sexual abuse, there's so many emotions that come up for that person. There's shame and guilt, but around themselves. Well, what did I allow that to happen, for example? And there's also the shame and confusion about the fact that there was some enjoyment around it, which is really the body just reacting. It's physiological reaction, but that feeling of how could I have enjoyed that? Or maybe they got something in return, and therefore they got love and affection, or they got gifts that they weren't given or wouldn't have received, so they felt that, well, okay, it's not so bad. Or maybe they were protecting a sibling. So there's so many different emotions attached and feelings around it, isn't there? That you're left.
Broad subject. I think to pressurize into being healed, I think it's an ongoing journey. Now I've been on this journey personally for a long time, but sharing for 20 years. But even, last week something happened that reminded me of something, but it was how I was able to attend to that compared to how I would have reacted in the past. It was more of being able to self-parent and respond, rather than react, which usually when there's been childhood sexual abuse, we will find ways unconsciously to support how we were treated, whether that's in our relationships or the sabotage we are on our own bodies or our own personalities, to make us feel as unworthy and as broken as we felt at that time. So it's about offering new experiences of love. And as you say, love and sex becomes very, very complicated, because if that was the only form of love that we were shown, then we deem sex as love. But of course, not all acts of sex are loving or going to evolve into that. So it will be a way of getting love, which can end in promiscuity and not respecting ourselves as sexual beings.
Well, that child wasn't respected. All their boundaries were completely broken.
Exactly.
So, someone in authority had acted improperly, and therefore, how can you trust someone in authority? So hence breaking the law and so on. There's no respect for authority. Or even being unsure of what's okay and what isn't, because that person in authority, whether it be a parent, a stranger, I don't know, family member, yeah, I find that is quite often the case. It's been a family member. How can you even begin to understand what's okay and what isn't?
Yeah, absolutely. And if they're the years, our primary years, inform us, then it's often about going back and reviewing those and self-agency, making choices. For me personally, it felt like something else was running my life. And I was a puppet to that as an adult. And it wasn't until I started to become aware of these ingrained threads of beliefs and, reviewing them as truth or not.
Yeah.
It's things children that we as children, they're watching my own children, they absorb everything as what the adults are saying as gospel truth. And I've worked with clients who've been traumatized by their religion, and that's had a huge effect on them as a sexual being, and how they feel about themselves and the shame and guilt. There's so many ways in which children can be abused or traumatized about sex, and adults.
Yeah, I think even that the attitude towards bodies or sexuality. I mean, even taking an example myself, I remember kind of my mother before I got to that stage of menstruating, but she just gave me a book to read.
Right.
Couldn't talk about it. She said, "Oh, if you've got any questions, come and ask me." Actually, I was so aware of her embarrassment. There was no way I could go and talk to her. And I think that, as you're saying, with my daughters, it was a celebration. Yeah. Hey, look, it's great. Just really being excited about it. But yeah, you're right. It is that attitude towards sex and our bodies and how we perceive that from childhood, even if we haven't been sexually abused.
Yeah. The whole culture can define body means sex. Well, a naked body means sex. It doesn't. A naked body is a naked body, a home for skin and bones, a home for a soul and a heart and a person. It's just the way everything's viewed and degraded, I think. That sex isn't some kind of celebration and a vital part of who we are. It's our passion, it's our creativity. It sources so much in our life. Even how we reflect on sex can often be how we relate to money. There's so many different aspects to it. But if it's seen as one thing, as something's got to be behind closed doors, and that body means that, and that's all it's for, how can we truly celebrate our bodies if they're just for sex?
Yes, I agree. And do you think that today's society it's more focused in that way?
More focused, did you say? There's still some aspects of society that doesn't allow a naked body because it's seen as sex rather than just we were born naked. I just find that we're still making it very taboo society, and children pick up on that.
Okay.
And learn that. It's the same as when children are told not to touch, but they're being curious, and curiosity is such a valuable human quality, to be curious. And if all the curiosity is dulled out of us, where's our sense of aliveness?
What about some of these reality programs? Like, what do you when you see the Yeah, I mean, especially I'm thinking
Yeah.
about Love Island.
I know what you mean. That's just kind of making sex a look, that we have to look a certain way and be a certain way and reveal ourselves in a certain way to be sexy. I mean, yeah. I don't know. It's selling sex, isn't it? Sex, money. There's such similarities in the way they've been related to the world and in the world. They're not much different, really. They both come across as dirty or expressed as dirty or shameful or greedy.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just think that my feeling is as well that because we don't feel we're okay as we are, we have to enhance our bodies, enhance our looks. We're not okay to be as we are. We have to look a certain way, be a certain way, and act in a certain way. And I think that's sad, because it's more about, as you say, just the way we look, rather than focusing on the being and just accepting ourselves and not having to live up to some kind of perfection, whatever that is.
Yeah, I just, looking at that, it just seems so empty. There's no quality behind it. As in, I don't know, for me, a sexy woman, she's self-assured and she's in her own skin and she's comfortable and she looks rich. And there's an inner beauty that and it's graceful. Whereas, that isn't sexy. There's a difference between sexual performance and the kind of sex I'm speaking of as a sensation that is alive and in all of us, really.
Yeah. Yes, and I think maybe that's it, isn't it? When we see those programs, it is about sexual performance rather than a real sexuality, whatever it's male or female.
I think that's important to teach children and people, is that that's fantasy, not fact. It's the same as porn. Porn is fantasy. It's not the fact of how we are meant to relate and treat each other. It's fantasy, and looking like that, and it's a fantasy, a fantasy we're being sold, really, and particularly young girls are striving to be like.
And young boys, I think young men the same. I think the pressures are on both, but yeah.
Yeah, certainly. Bless them. What a world to grow up in, hey?
Yeah, yes, I think it's a very distorted kind of a view. And have things changed over the centuries? I don't know.
I don't know.
I think it's
if
in
we
a
could just
different
be
guise.
encouraged to be who we are, rather than to be like that, like that as in always an image that we've got to strive to be.
Yeah. Yes. Well, that's a really interesting conversation today, and I think we've meandered from one thing to another, and we've covered quite a lot about sexuality, childhood abuse, and the traumas that it may have resulted in, and the way we feel about our bodies and our sexuality, and what our true sexuality is. Our true being, whether it's male, female, or anything in between.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's having the freedom to know what that is for ourselves, and to be able to safely express that and safely explore that. That's the importance, is that we're not infringing upon others, and we feel safe in our exploration and expression.
Yes, yeah, definitely. And I think there's an awful lot of shame, as you say, around our bodies generally, which is really sad. Very sad.
I saw a little girl on the playground last week. I was there with my grandson. She only must have been about 10. She was on a swing and she kept singing body shaming, body shaming. And I was like, oh my goodness, where is this? Where is this coming from? And why is it being chanted in that manner? It was just, it shook me a little that a child that young knew those words, and it was being taken something as like a joke. They could ridicule others, kind of thing. It was just the tone of the chanting.
Yeah.
When it's a painful experience and an unnecessary one, when all of our bodies are beautiful.
So true. So very true. So I think it is something for listeners to remind themselves of, is that we are all beautiful beings, except for the way we are, rather than trying to be some kind of manufactured being that we see publicised everywhere.
Yeah, very much.
What's one thing that you would like the audience to take away from today? What is it that you would like to say to people?
That the most important relationship to have in the world is with ourselves, and trust in the self. If we can trust ourselves to take care of self, then that's a big step towards knowing our boundaries, knowing our no, a big step to caring for and viewing our body in a different way, and a big step to trusting our intuition again, especially because it's how we give ourselves away when we know that doesn't feel right, or that's not the way it is, but we'll still go that way anyway. So just recreating relationships of trust with ourselves. One thing that really helped me when my daughter's 22 now, but when she was younger, was if it wasn't good enough for my daughter, it wasn't good enough for me. And that really started to help me see myself in a different way, that there was things situations I was willing to put myself in, ways in which I treated my body that I would never have wanted for her. And that kind of helps when we can reflect in that way, when we have no sense of self and what's right and wrong, because we tend to care for those around us a bit more sincerely, I suppose. It's easier to care for someone else than it is ourselves, but if we can reflect that back.
Yes, I would agree. And I was thinking about as well those that maybe don't have children, and maybe it is those loved ones or people they care. So I think it is,
we very often, our quality of how we relate is how may I love you, but to ask ourselves that question, how may I love you, and really listen to what we really feel we can give ourselves to feel that love, that quality of love, so that we're not beggars for love, waiting for someone else to love us. How can we create a sense of love for ourselves today, or in our environment?
Great advice. So I'm going to put all your details in the show notes if people want to get in touch with you. But what's one easy way, Michelle?
My website is Michelle Roberton. I noticed you said Robertson earlier. That's all right. My granny would be very cross.
I must apologise to your granny.
No, okay. It's Robertson without the S, so it's Roberton. So it's michelleroberton.com, and that's got online stuff, courses on it. But then it leads off into more the touch therapy that I share, and trauma work, and childhood sexual abuse.
I hope you found this episode interesting as well as helpful. Do get in touch if you would like to learn more about working with me, My email address is info@wendycapewell.co.uk. Take good care of yourself. Until next time.